Taman Peninsula, August 2nd, 1943. The night was absolute. No moon. Cloud cover at 1,200 meters. Visibility 0 beyond 50 meters. The temperature was 14 degrees Celsius. Wind from the southeast at 8 kilometers per hour. The airfield designated Operational Base 39 was 3 kilometers behind Soviet lines near Golubitskaya. The field was dirt. No paved surfaces. No permanent structures. Aircraft dispersed under camouflage netting between trees. The only sound was a single Shvetsov M-11 radial engine idling at 800 revolutions per minute. The vibration could be felt through the frozen ground. Nothing else moved. A Polikarpov Po-2 biplane sat on the taxiway. The aircraft was constructed from plywood and fabric. Total weight loaded 890 kilograms. Wingspan 11.4 meters. Length 8.17 meters. The engine produced 125 horsepower at maximum throttle. Cruising speed 120 kilometers per hour. Maximum altitude with payload 900 meters. The aircraft carried 4 Fab-50 fragmentation bombs mounted under the lower wings. Total explosive payload 200 kilograms. Fuel capacity 130 liters. Estimated flight time 2 hours maximum. One woman climbed into the front cockpit. She wore a leather helmet, goggles, and a quilted flight suit over 2 layers of wool clothing. Her hands were wrapped in bandages beneath gloves. She settled into the wooden seat and fastened a canvas safety belt. A second woman climbed into the rear cockpit. She carried a map case and a stopwatch. Neither spoke. The ground crew removed the wheel chocks. The pilot advanced the throttle. The engine noise increased to 1,600 revolution per minute. The aircraft rolled forward across frozen ruts. At 60 kilometers per hour, the tail lifted. At 80 kilometers per hour, the wheels left the ground. The PO2 climbed at 3 meters per second into darkness. The altimeter read 200 meters. Then 400 meters. The aircraft leveled at 550 meters and turned southwest. By August 1943, the Eastern Front extended 2,800 kilometers from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Soviet forces were advancing westward following the German defeat at Kursk in July. The advance was measured in kilometers per week. German forces conducted defensive operations along prepared lines. The Wehrmacht maintained supply routes through occupied territory using rail and road networks. Soviet command identified these supply lines as critical targets. Conventional bombing operations were costly. German flak defenses were dense. Luftwaffe fighter coverage remained effective during daylight hours. Soviet losses in day bombing operations exceeded acceptable thresholds. The solution was night harassment operations. Low-altitude attacks conducted in darkness against supply depots, ammunition storage, fuel dumps, and troop concentrations. The objective was not destruction of major targets. The objective was continuous disruption. German forces required rest, required resupply, required uninterrupted logistics. Night operations prevented all three. The aircraft selected for this role was the Polikarpov Po-2. The selection was not tactical preference. It was resource availability. The Po-2 was obsolete. It was a trainer aircraft designed in 1928. The Soviet Air Force had thousands in inventory. They were expendable. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment was formed in October 1941. The unit was designated Guards status in February 1943 and redesignated as the 46th Taman Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. The regiment consisted of 3 squadrons. Total personnel: 115 aircrew and 150 ground staff. All personnel were female. This was not ideology. It was allocation. Male pilots were assigned to fighter and bomber regiments. Female pilots were assigned to available aircraft. The available aircraft were Po-2 seconds. The regiment received no special equipment, no radar, no radio navigation, no instrument lighting. The aircraft had open cockpits, no armor, no defensive armament. Navigation was visual, map and compass. Landmarks memorized during daylight reconnaissance. Senior Lieutenant Yevdokia Nikolaevna Bershanskaya was 30 years old in August 1943. She was born in Stavropol Krai in 1913. She learned to fly in 1933 through the Osoviakhim program. She worked as a civilian flight instructor from 1934 to 1941. She joined the 588th Regiment in October 1941. She flew her first combat mission on June 8, 1942. Target: German troop concentration near Morozovsk. She completed the mission and returned. She flew again on June 9th and June 10th, and every night, weather permitted, for 14 months. By August 1943, she had flown 312 combat sorties. She was not the youngest pilot. She was not the most skilled. She survived because she did not deviate from procedure. Her method was repetition. She flew the same routes repeatedly until terrain features were memorized. She calculated fuel consumption precisely. She knew the aircraft's glide ratio at every weight configuration. She understood wind effect on bomb trajectory. She did not improvise. Improvisation introduced variables. Variables reduced survival probability. She flew at consistent altitudes. She approached targets from consistent directions. She released bombs at consistent distances. The consistency was not tactical brilliance. It was statistical optimization. The more variables eliminated, the higher the success rate. The target tonight was a German supply depot, 12 kilometers behind enemy lines near Veselovka. Intelligence reported fuel storage and ammunition stockpiles. The depot served German forces along the Taman defensive line. Soviet ground forces required the depot neutralized to support an offensive scheduled for August 4th. The mission was assigned to Bershanskaya and her navigator, Junior Lieutenant Galina Brok-Beltsova. Flight plan: depart 1:45. Approach from northeast. Attack altitude 750 meters. Return by 2:30. Expected German defenses: searchlights and 20 mm Flak Vierling 38 quad anti-aircraft guns. Predicted weather, cloud cover favorable, wind minimal. At 1:58, the PO2 was 11 kilometers from target. Altitude 550 meters. Airspeed 115 kilometers per hour. Bershanskaya navigated by following the coastline. The Black Sea reflected minimal light from cloud cover. The contrast was sufficient for orientation. She adjusted, heading 3 degrees west to compensate for wind drift. At 2:03, she identified the target, a concentration of structures partially concealed by camouflage netting, vehicle tracks visible in mud, lights visible through gaps in netting. She climbed to 750 meters. The engine note changed as the aircraft gained altitude. Climb rate decreased with altitude. At 750 meters, she leveled and began the attack run. Distance to target, 1,200 meters. She maintained heading. Airspeed, 120 kilometers per hour. She signaled her navigator by tapping the fuselage twice. The navigator shifted position and prepared the bomb release mechanism. The mechanism was mechanical. A lever connected to cables running to bomb racks under the wings. No electrical systems, no hydraulics, manual release only. The navigator watched the ground through the open cockpit. She used a stopwatch and visual estimation. No bomb site existed. Accuracy depended on experience and calculation. At 400 meters from target, Bershanskaya cut the engine. The M-11 stopped immediately. The propeller windmilled to a stop. The sudden silence was total except for wind through wing struts. The aircraft glided. Glide ratio was approximately 1:11 at current weight and configuration. Descent rate 3 meters per second. The PO2 descended through darkness without engine noise. German anti-aircraft crews relied on auditory detection. They listened for engine sound. They heard nothing. The aircraft was invisible against the black sky. The only sound was air moving over fabric-covered wings, a soft, rushing noise audible only at close range. The glide continued. Altitude decreased. 700 meters. 650 meters. 600 meters. Bershanskaya adjusted control surfaces to maintain glide path. Small movements. No abrupt inputs. The aircraft responded slowly. At 500 meters, the navigator began counting. She watched the target grow larger. At 15 seconds, she pulled the release lever. 4 bombs dropped simultaneously. The aircraft lurched upward slightly as 200 kilograms of weight separated. Bershanskaya immediately restarted the engine. The M-11 caught on the second compression. The propeller spun. Engine noise returned. She banked left and descended to 400 meters. The bombs impacted 4 seconds after release. 4 explosions in rapid sequence. The depot erupted. Secondary explosions followed immediately as fuel stores ignited. Flames rose 30 meters. The entire facility was engulfed within 12 seconds. Bershanskaya did not observe the impact. She was already turning away. At that moment, Searchlights activated. 3 beams swept the sky in coordinated patterns. One beam caught the PO2 briefly, then lost it. Another beam found it and locked on. The aircraft was suddenly visible, suspended in white light. Anti-aircraft fire began within 3 seconds. Tracer rounds arced upward. Bright green streaks. 20 millimeters. Explosive shells. Rate of fire 800 rounds per minute per barrel. 4 barrels per flak Vierling mount. 3 mounts engaged. The combined fire created a cone of projectiles converging on the illuminated aircraft. Peninsula dove. She pushed the control stick forward and banked right simultaneously. The PO2 descended rapidly. Airspeed increased to 140 kilometers per hour. Flak bursts detonated around the aircraft. Black smoke and shrapnel. Multiple impacts struck the wings and fuselage. Fabric tore. Wood splintered. The control stick felt different. Resistance had changed. She continued diving. Altitude 300 meters. 200 meters. 100 meters. She leveled at 80 meters above ground. The searchlight lost the aircraft in ground clutter. Anti-aircraft fire ceased. The PO2 was below minimum effective range. She maintained low altitude and increased speed to maximum. Airspeed 152 kilometers per hour. The engine ran rough. Vibration was abnormal. Something was damaged. She maintained heading and monitored instruments. Oil pressure normal. Temperature normal. RPM fluctuating. The aircraft was airworthy but compromised. Return flight duration 12 minutes. She landed at 2:19. The approach was standard. She reduced throttle at 200 meters and descended at 3 meters per second. Touchdown speed 65 kilometers per hour. The aircraft rolled 30 meters and stopped. Engine shut down. Ground crew approached immediately. They conducted visual inspection using flashlights. They counted 17 shrapnel holes in the wings and fuselage. The fabric covering was torn in multiple locations. One control cable was damaged but intact. The wooden frame showed impact damage, but structural integrity was maintained. The aircraft was classified as airworthy with field repairs. Golubitskaya exited the cockpit. She walked to the operations tent. The duty officer recorded mission data. Target, supply depot, Veselovka. Time, 1:45 to 2:19. Bombs delivered, 4, Fab 50. Result, depot destroyed. Secondary explosions confirmed. Aircraft damage, 17 hits. Fabric and frame damage, airworthy. Personnel, no injuries. The log entry consumed 4 lines. The information was transmitted to regimental headquarters at 2:35. Golubitskaya drank hot tea. She ate a piece of black bread. She did not speak. At 3:15, she was scheduled for a second sortie. The aircraft repairs were in progress. Estimated completion 3. If you value precision over myth and history over emotion, subscribe to Voices in the Smoke to keep these records alive. The second mission departed at 3:18. Target German artillery position near Golubitskaya. The procedure was identical. Low altitude approach. Engine cut at 400 meters. Glide. Bomb release. Engine restart. Escape. The artillery position received 4 Fab 50 bombs. The position was silenced. Peninsula returned at 4:02. Total flight time 44 minutes. She was scheduled for a third mission at 4:45. Weather deteriorated. Fog reduced visibility below operational minimums. The mission was cancelled. She returned to her quarters at 5:10. She lay on a wooden bunk. She did not sleep. The 46th Taman Guards Regiment flew continuously from June 1942 to May 1945. Total sorties 23,672. Total bombs dropped approximately 3,000 tons. Confirmed targets destroyed or damaged: 17 river crossings, 9 railway stations, 2 railway junctions, 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, 176 armored vehicles, 86 artillery positions. Estimated enemy casualties 7,000. Regiment losses 32 aircrew killed in action. 23 members received the Hero of the Soviet Union decoration. These are documented statistics. The psychological impact cannot be quantified in the same manner. German frontline reports from 1943 and 1944 described the effect of continuous night operations. Soldiers reported inability to rest, constant anticipation of attack. The sound of approaching aircraft became associated with immediate danger. The aircraft were called Nachthexen by German troops, night witches. The term appeared in field reports and command communications. It was not propaganda. It was operational terminology. German units requested increased anti-aircraft defenses in sectors where the PO2 operations were concentrated. Requests were partially fulfilled. Resources were limited. The attacks continued. The tactical effectiveness was measured in operational tempo degradation. German forces required 8 hours of rest per 24-hour period to maintain combat effectiveness. Night harassment operations reduced rest periods to 4 hours or less. Sustained over weeks, the cumulative effect was measurable decline in response times and decision-making quality. This was the strategic objective. The 200 kilograms of explosives delivered per sortie were secondary. The primary weapon was sleep deprivation. The PO2 was the delivery system for sustained psychological pressure. The depot destroyed on August 2nd burned for 6 hours. Fuel stores consumed completely. Ammunition continued detonating until dawn. German supply operations along the Taman line were disrupted for 36 hours. Soviet forces launched their offensive on August 4th as scheduled. The offensive advanced 6 kilometers in the first 12 hours. The advance was supported by artillery that received ammunition on time because German counter-battery fire was limited by fuel shortages. The connection between the night mission on August 2nd and the ground advance on August 4th was not direct. It was systemic. One degraded supply node created cascading effects across German defensive operations. Peninsula flew her final combat mission on May 4, 1945. Target: German position near Berlin. The mission was completed without incident. The aircraft returned. Germany surrendered on May 8th. The 46th Taman Guards Regiment was disbanded in October 1945. Personnel were demobilized. Golubitskaya returned to civilian life. She worked as a flight instructor until 1954. She married. She had children. She did not discuss the war publicly. When historians located her in the 1980s, she provided brief statements. She confirmed mission numbers. She confirmed procedures. She declined interviews focused on personal experience. She said the regiment's work was documented. Nothing required addition. The PO-2 aircraft was scrapped or transferred to agricultural services. A small number were preserved in museums. The 46th Taman Guards Regiment was acknowledged in Soviet military histories. The acknowledgement was brief. One paragraph, typically. The focus was on male aviation units. Female regiments were mentioned but not emphasized. This was standard. Post-war historiography prioritized conventional narratives. The 588th did not fit conventional categories. It was marginalized by documentation structure rather than deliberate erasure. Western historians rediscovered the unit in the 1990s when Soviet archives were declassified. The mission logs were detailed. Every sortie recorded. Pilot names, target coordinates, results, damage assessments. The documentation was military standard. No personal narratives, no emotional content, just operational data. Researchers compiled the data into statistical analyses. The analyses confirmed the tactical effectiveness. The PO-2 operations achieved sustained harassment objectives with minimal resource expenditure. The cost-benefit ratio was favorable compared to conventional bombing operations. Modern air forces study the 46th Taman Guards operations as a case study in asymmetric warfare. The principles are incorporated into doctrine. Use of obsolete platforms for specialized roles. Exploitation of technological limitations as tactical advantages. Sustained low-intensity operations to achieve cumulative strategic effects. The PO-2's slow speed made it difficult to engage with systems designed for faster targets. The lack of metal construction reduced radar signature. The night operations exploited gaps in German defensive coverage. These were not accidental advantages. They were identified and exploited systematically. Golubitskaya died in 1995. She was 82. The obituary noted her military service. Hero of the Soviet Union, 804 combat missions. The obituary did not elaborate. Her service record was available in military archives. The record was comprehensive. Dates, missions, awards, promotions. The record did not include personal reflections. No letters, No diaries, no interviews beyond brief confirmations provided to historians in the 1980s. The documentation is entirely operational. The last PO-2 biplane was retired from Soviet military service in 1959. The aircraft type remained in agricultural use until 1984. Production ceased in 1953 after 33,000 units were manufactured. It was the most produced biplane in history. The majority were used for crop dusting and aerial surveying. Approximately 300 were used in combat operations during World War II. The combat operations represented less than 1% of total aircraft production. The tactical impact was disproportionate to the numbers deployed. The German term Nachtsachsen persisted in veteran accounts after the war. Former Wehrmacht soldiers interviewed in the 1970s and 1980s recalled the night operations. They described the sound of wind through wings, the silence before bombs fell, the inability to predict or prevent attacks. Several stated the psychological effect exceeded the physical damage. One account noted that soldiers preferred daytime artillery bombardment because artillery could be predicted and countered. The night attacks were unpredictable. They could occur anywhere, at any time. The randomness was more difficult to endure than consistent danger. This is consistent with psychological warfare theory. Predictable threats allow adaptation. Unpredictable threats create sustained anxiety. Sustained anxiety degrades performance more effectively than intermittent high-intensity stress. The 46th Taman Guards operations were optimized for sustained unpredictable harassment. The optimization was not theoretical. It was empirical. The regiment tested different approaches and retained the most effective. The effective approach was continuous operations with irregular timing and varied targets. German forces could not predict when or where the next attack would occur. The unpredictability was the weapon. The mission flown on August 2nd, 1943, was one of 23,672. It was not exceptional. It followed standard procedure. The outcome was typical. Target destroyed. Aircraft damaged. Crew uninjured. The mission appears in the regimental log as a single-line entry. It was successful because it achieved the objective. The objective was disruption. The disruption was achieved. The mission required no further documentation. The Germans called her a witch. The records called her Senior Lieutenant Golubitskaya. The terminology was irrelevant to the outcome. The depot burned. The supply line was disrupted. The offensive advanced on schedule. The war continued. The sound of her engine did not.